The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the scent of burning rubber when I rolled my car to the starting line at Riverside Speedway. Through my windshield, I could see the sneers and hear the dismissive laughter from the other drivers, all men in their fancy sponsored vehicles with professional pit crews. "Look who decided to join the big leagues," one of them shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "Daddy's little girl thinks she can race with the boys," another chimed in. "That junker won't make it past the first lap." Their words stung, but I gripped my steering wheel tighter, knuckles turning white. What they didn't know was that every mocking word, every dismissive glance fueled something inside me, a determination they couldn't begin to understand. Let them laugh now. I glanced at the photo of my father taped to the dashboard and whispered, "This one's for you, Dad." The marshal raised the flag, and I revved my engine, the sound drowning out the doubters as I prepared to show them all what this mechanic's daughter could really do. I'd love to hear where you're watching from in the comments below. Are you also someone who's been underestimated? Growing up in my father's auto shop on the outskirts of Millbrook, I learned early that life wasn't fair. Dad Mike Sullivan to his customers, but Magic Mike to racing enthusiasts who remembered his glory days had raised me alone after Mom died when I was 8. Every day after school, I'd rush to the garage, homework spread across the hood of whatever car he was fixing, watching his hands work miracles on engines others had declared dead. "Emma," he'd say, wiping grease from his weathered face, "don't ever let anyone tell you what you can't do, especially not because you're a girl." By 12, I could change oil in my sleep. By 15, I was diagnosing engine problems that stumped mechanics with 30 years of experience. The garage became my sanctuary, the smell of motor oil more comforting than any perfume. Dad never treated me like I was fragile or incapable. He pushed me, challenged me, believed in me when no one else did. And when I turned 16, he surprised me with a beat-up 1989 Mustang that barely ran. "It's not much to look at," he admitted, "but it's got good bones. Show me what you can do with it." It became our project nights and weekends spent rebuilding that car from the inside out, him teaching and me learning, both of us dreaming about the day I'd take it to the track. But dreams have a way of crashing when you least expect it. 2 years later, just as we were putting the finishing touches on my Mustang, Dad had his first heart attack. The second one came 3 months after that. And the third, the one that took him from me, happened on a quiet Sunday morning while I was making us breakfast. I was 19. Suddenly alone, with a garage full of unfinished projects and outstanding loans. The bank didn't care that I could rebuild a transmission blindfolded. They saw a teenage girl with no business experience and moved to foreclose faster than I could process my grief. That's when Harrison Reed entered my life, owner of Reed Performance Motors, the biggest automotive shop in the county, and my father's longtime rival. With his designer suits and perfectly manicured hands that had clearly never seen the underside of a car, he offered to buy the garage for a fraction of what it was worth. "It's a generous offer considering the circumstances," he said with a smile that never reached his eyes. "Your father's reputation has been declining for years. Most of his customers will come to me anyway." I refused, of course. The garage was all I had left of Dad. Harrison's smile disappeared. "Be reasonable, Emma. A girl like you running a mechanic shop? It's a man's world. You're setting yourself up for failure." His words echoed what others had been saying more subtly, that I should sell, get a suitable job, maybe go to college. That Dad's dream had died with him. I might have crumbled if not for Joe Martinez, Dad's oldest friend and former racing partner, who showed up the day after the funeral with a toolbox and determination in his eyes. "Your father would haunt me till my dying day if I let you face this alone," he said, rolling up his sleeves. "Together, we fought to keep the garage alive, Joe handling the customers who doubted a woman's mechanical abilities, me proving them wrong with every fixed car. 6 months of 18-hour days, of learning business accounting by night and fixing engines by day, of eating ramen noodles to save every penny for loan payments. Slowly, we stabilized. Some of Dad's loyal customers returned. Word spread that Mike Sullivan's daughter had inherited more than just his blue eyes. I had his magic touch with engines. But Harrison Reed wasn't used to being ran. When he couldn't buy me out, he began a systematic campaign to drive me out of business. Suddenly, my parts deliveries were delayed. Suppliers who had worked with Dad for decades claimed they could no longer extend credit to Sullivan's garage. Potential customers would come in for estimates, then mysteriously cancel after receiving calls from Reed Performance offering special discounts. The final blow came when I discovered that Harrison had purchased the property adjacent to the garage land that Dad had always planned to expand onto, and announced plans to build a state-of-the-art service center that would put my quaint little operation permanently out of business. I came home that night to my small apartment above the garage, collapsed onto my bed, and did something I hadn't allowed myself since Dad died. I cried. Hours later, exhausted and empty, I found myself sitting in my Mustang, the one Dad and I had rebuilt together, the one project we'd actually finished. The leather-wrapped steering wheel still bore the imprints of his hands. The engine we'd lovingly assembled purred like a contented cat when I turned the key. Without really thinking about where I was going, I drove past the city limits, along the winding county roads, finally ending up at Riverside Speedway where Dad had won his last amateur race 15 years ago. The track was closed for the night, but the gate was open for maintenance crews. I slipped inside, drove onto the empty track, and did what felt natural. I raced, lap after lap, pushing the Mustang to its limits, feeling Dad's presence beside me with every turn. When I finally stopped, breathless and somehow lighter than I'd felt in months, I noticed an older man watching from the stands. Walter Thompson, the track owner and an old acquaintance of my father's, approached as I climbed out of the car. "You drive like him," he said simply. "Better, maybe, more aggressive on the turns." Then he told me something that would change everything. Riverside was hosting the Regional Amateur Championships in 3 months, an event that carried not only a $50,000 prize, but sponsorship opportunities worth 10 times that amount. "Your dad always said you'd outrace him someday," Walter remarked. "Maybe it's time to prove him right." The idea was crazy. I was a mechanic, not a professional driver. I had a struggling business to save. But as Walter pointed out, I also had a perfectly good race car, years of experience from watching my father, and apparently, inherited talent. "Besides," he added, "the publicity alone could save your garage, even if you don't win. People love an underdog story, especially one with a pretty face." I ignored the last comment. I'd had enough of being judged by my gender to last a lifetime. But the rest made a strange kind of sense. That night, I made a decision. I would enter the race. I would use every skill Dad had taught me, and I would show Harrison Reed and everyone else who had underestimated me exactly what a mechanic's daughter could do. The next morning, I called Joe and told him my plan. There was a long silence before he sighed. "Your father would say it's too dangerous," he finally responded. "Then he'd ask what modifications we need to make to the engine." We both laughed, and just like that, Operation Underdog was born. By day, we kept the garage running, taking on every job we could get. By night, we transformed my Mustang from a street-legal beauty to a track-worthy beast. Every spare dollar went into performance parts. Every free minute was spent at the local track, practicing until my reflexes were razor-sharp and my lap times were consistently impressive. Word got around, as it always does in small towns. Most people thought I was having some kind of grief-induced breakdown. "Poor Sullivan girl, trying to follow in her daddy's footsteps," they'd say within earshot, not bothering to lower their voices. "She'll get herself killed." Harrison Reed found it particularly amusing when he heard, stopping by the garage one afternoon with the pretense of checking on me. "Racing," he chuckled. looking around at my modest operation. "Emma, be serious. This isn't a Disney movie where the plucky underdog triumphs against all odds. This is real life. Real racers have teams, sponsors, years of experience. They don't run garage shops by day and play at being drivers by night." He stepped closer, his expensive cologne unable to mask the underlying scent of insincerity. "I'm worried about you. Your father wouldn't want you risking everything on such a desperate gamble. My offer to buy this place still stands. Think about it. You could walk away with enough money to start fresh. Maybe go to college. Find a career more suitable for someone like you." I met his gaze steadily. "Someone like me? You mean a woman?" His smile didn't waver. "I mean someone young, with their whole life ahead of them. This place is a sinking ship. Emma, I'm offering you a lifeboat." As he turned to leave, he paused in the doorway. "Oh, by the way, I've entered one of my cars in that same race. Professional driver, top-of-the-line equipment, just so you know what you're up against." The message was clear. Whatever game he thought I was playing, he intended to crush me completely. The next few weeks were a blur of preparation. My days grew even longer, working at the garage until closing, then heading to the track until midnight, then back to the workshop to tweak the Mustang's performance. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. Joe worried I was pushing too hard, but I could see the pride in his eyes when my lap times kept improving. 2 weeks before the race, disaster struck. I returned to the garage one morning to find the door jimmied open and my Mustang violated sugar in the gas tank, cut brake lines, and worst of all, critical engine components damaged or missing entirely. The timing couldn't have been worse. Most of our money was already sunk into race preparations, and parts for my particular engine build would take weeks to source through normal channels. The police took a report, but weren't optimistic about finding the culprits. "Probably just vandals," the officer suggested, though we all knew better. Without explicit proof. However, there was nothing to be done about Harrison Reed and his convenient alibi of being at a charity gala the night of the break-in. I sent Joe home that evening, waited until I was alone, then allowed myself exactly 10 minutes of despair. 10 minutes to scream and cry and curse the unfairness of it all. When those 10 minutes were up, I washed my face, made a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint, and got to work. If Reed thought this would stop me, he had severely underestimated my determination. The next morning, I called in every favor Dad had ever earned in 30 years of honest business. Former customers became part scouts, searching junkyards across 3 states. Competing mechanics who respected my father offered workshop space and tools. A retired machinist volunteered to fabricate the parts we couldn't find. Even some of Reed's own employees, ones who remembered how he'd driven other small shops out of business, discreetly provided insider information about his racing setup. For 7 days straight, I barely left the garage, catching naps on the old couch in the office between repair sessions. Joe brought food that I rarely remembered to eat. My hands were constantly grease-stained, my hair perpetually tied back in a messy ponytail, but slowly, impossibly. The Mustang came back to life, not just repaired, but improved. As if the attack had forced us to rebuild it better than before. 3 days before the race, I took it to the track for a test run and recorded my best time yet. Walter Thompson was there, stopwatch in hand. "That would have put you in the top 5 last year," he said with a whistle. "Your dad would be doing backflips." I wanted to believe him, but doubt still gnawed at me. Harrison Reed had resources I couldn't match, connections I didn't have. I was operating on minimal sleep and maximum stress. What if all this effort was for nothing? What if I was just setting myself up for public humiliation that night? Alone in Dad's old office, I found myself talking to his photograph. "I'm scared," I admitted to the empty room. "What if I can't do this?" Almost in answer, my gaze fell on a framed quote Dad had kept on his desk. "The person who says it cannot be done should not interrupt the person doing it." The morning of the race dawned clear and cool. Perfect racing weather. I arrived at Riverside Speedway 3 hours early, my nerves making it impossible to stay away any longer. Joe followed with our makeshift pit crew, a collection of Dad's old friends and loyal customers, all volunteering their Saturday to support Mike Sullivan's daughter. As we unloaded the Mustang and prepared for inspection, I couldn't help noticing the stark contrast between our operation and the others around us. Most competitors had professional trailers, matching team uniforms, and equipment that probably cost more than my entire garage. Harrison Reed's team was particularly impressive, with their gleaming transporters and crew of at least 15 people bustling around a sleek, purpose-built race car in Reed Performance's signature blue and silver. The driver, a former semi-pro I recognized from regional competitions, watched our humble setup with barely disguised amusement. Whispers and snickers followed me through the paddock as I completed registration. "That's her Sullivan's kid. Nice charity case. Letting a girl in. Bet she doesn't finish the first 10 laps." I kept my head high, reminding myself that their opinions meant nothing. Still, it was hard not to feel like an imposter, especially when the technical inspector spent twice as long examining my car as he had the others, scrutinizing every modification as if expecting to find violations. The driver's meeting was worse. 25 competitors, 24 men and me, crowded into the track's conference room for final instructions. I took a seat in the back, trying to be inconspicuous. But Harrison Reed made a point of acknowledging me loudly. "Emma, so glad you could make it. We were all wondering if you'd actually show up." His false concern drew attention from everyone in the room. "That's quite a unique car you've brought. Family heirloom. Isn't it brave choice for a serious race?" Before I could respond, the race director called for attention, but the damage was done. I could feel every eye in the room evaluating me, most concluding I didn't belong. After the meeting, as drivers dispersed to their teams, Harrison cornered me in the hallway. His voice dropped, all pretense of friendliness gone. "This is your last chance to withdraw gracefully," he said quietly. "Mechanical failure happens to everyone occasionally. No one would question it." When I didn't respond, his expression hardened. "You're making a mistake, Emma. Your father knew his limitations. That's why he retired from racing. He understood it was a young man's game. If he were here, he'd tell you the same thing." The mention of my father ignited something in me. "If he were here," I replied evenly, "he'd be in my pit crew, telling me to kick your arrogant ass." Harrison's laugh held no humor. "Well, he's not here, is he? And after today, neither will you be, not in my town, not in my industry." He walked away before I could respond, leaving me shaking with a combination of rage and renewed determination. Qualifying rounds began an hour later. Each driver had 3 laps to set their best time, determining starting positions for the main event. I was scheduled last, a subtle insult I chose to ignore. As I waited, watching others take their turns, I observed their lines, their braking points, looking for any advantage I could find. The track announcer barely concealed his skepticism when introducing me. And finally, in car number 17, Emma Sullivan, daughter of former local racer Mike Sullivan, making her competitive debut. The crowd's reaction was mixed, some applause, some audible comments about publicity stunts and diversity quotas. I blocked it all out as I pulled onto the track, focusing only on the asphalt ahead and the powerful machine around me. My first lap was cautious, getting a feel for how the Mustang handled on this particular surface. The second was faster as I gained confidence. On the third, I pushed to my limit, taking the corners aggressively, feeling the car respond to every input like it was an extension of my body. When I crossed the finish line and returned to the pits, Joe was grinning ear to ear. "8th position," he announced as I climbed out. "Out of 25. Not bad for a rookie." It was better than I'd dared hope, but still not enough to be taken seriously. Harrison Reed had qualified second, his professional driver expertly handling the high-performance machine. As our teams prepared for the main event, scheduled after lunch, Reed made sure to walk past our pit area. "Congratulations on not embarrassing yourself completely. he offered loudly enough for nearby competitors to hear. 8th is respectable. For someone like you. The 2-hour break before the main race stretched my nerves to breaking point. I forced down a sandwich at Joe's insistence, then retreated to the quiet of my car to center myself. The Mustang's familiar interior calmed me, surrounded by changes and modifications I'd made with my own hands. I ran through the race strategy Joe and I had developed, visualizing each turn, each passing opportunity, each potential challenge. We were realistic about our chances. My car lacked the raw power of some competitors, but its handling was exceptional, and I knew its capabilities intimately. If I drove smart, conserved the car, and capitalized on others' mistakes, a top 5 finish wasn't impossible. That would be victory enough, proving I belonged on this track, gaining respect that might translate to more business for the garage. The dream of actually winning seemed too far-fetched to consider seriously. As start time approached, I suited up and joined the other drivers for introductions. The stands were packed. Weekend racing enthusiasts drawn by promotional materials that had played up the local girl takes on the big boys angle. I grimaced at the patronizing framing, but couldn't deny we needed the attention. Standing on the track while the announcer read my minimal credentials, I spotted a familiar face in the crowd. Elena Reyes, a reporter from the local paper who had covered my father's races years ago. She gave me a subtle thumbs up, and somehow that small gesture of support steadied me more than anything else could have. Engine roaring, heart pounding. I took my position in the starting grid. 8th place put me in the middle of the pack, not ideal, but not terrible either. From my cockpit, I could see Harrison Reed's driver 2 rows ahead, his blue and silver car gleaming in the afternoon sun. The starter raised the green flag, and 25 engines revved in anticipation. When the flag dropped, we surged forward in a cacophony of sound and fury. The first turn was chaos, cars jostling for position, drivers taking unnecessary risks to gain early advantage. I held my line, refusing to be intimidated into the wall, but also avoiding reckless moves. By the end of the first lap, I had lost 2 positions to more aggressive drivers, but kept the car intact, playing the long game as Joe had advised. The race settled into a rhythm after that. 50 laps was an endurance test as much as a speed challenge. I focused on consistency, gradually working my way back up as others pushed their cars too hard, too early. By the halfway point, I had reclaimed 8th place and was pressing the 7th place driver, looking for an opening. That's when I noticed something alarming on my gauges. The oil pressure was fluctuating, dropping dangerously low in the turns. A cold knot formed in my stomach. We had checked everything meticulously, but racing puts enormous stress on components. Had we missed something, or had Reed's sabotage been more thorough than we'd discovered? Either way, I had a choice to make: pull into the pits and likely end my race, or push on and risk catastrophic engine failure. I thought of all the people who expected me to fail, who would nod knowingly when I limped off the track with mechanical issues. I thought of Harrison Reed's smug satisfaction, and I thought of my father, who had taught me that sometimes you have to gamble everything on your own abilities. I adjusted my driving style, easing off slightly in the turns where the pressure dropped most significantly, then compensating on the straights. It cost me some time, but kept the engine running. Lap after lap, I nursed the wounded Mustang, waiting for my moment. That moment came with 10 laps to go. When 2 cars ahead of me collided while fighting for position, I threaded through the debris field while others hesitated, moving up to 5th place. The crowd, which had largely ignored me earlier, began to take notice. With 5 laps remaining, I was in 4th, closing on 3rd Reed's driver, who was clearly struggling with tire wear. My own car was suffering, the oil pressure now consistently low, but I sensed the Reed machine had problems of its own. Its once precise cornering had become erratic, the back end sliding unpredictably. On the final lap, entering the last series of turns, I made my move, diving to the inside where he least expected it, forcing him to defend awkwardly. His tires, pushed beyond their limits, finally surrendered grip. The blue and silver car slid wide, grazing the wall. I shot past into third place, crossing the finish line with my engine protesting but still running. The crowd's reaction was immediate and unexpected, genuine applause and cheers as the announcer called my name. And taking third place in her competitive debut, Emma Sullivan. I pulled into pit lane in a daze, where Joe and our makeshift crew awaited with expressions of disbelief and joy. "Third," Joe shouted as I climbed out, legs shaky from 2 hours of intense concentration. "Third place. Emma, your dad would be—" He broke off, overcome with emotion. But I understood. Third place in my first serious race, with a rebuilt streetcar and a volunteer crew, against professional teams with vastly more resources. It felt impossible. Yet the trophy in my hands proved otherwise. As media gathered around the top 3 finishers, I caught sight of Harrison Reed's thunderous expression. His driver had limped to a 6th-place finish after the wall contact, a humiliating result for such a heavily favored team. Elena Reyes pushed through the crowd, microphone in hand. "Emma Sullivan, the talk of today's race. How does it feel to prove all the doubters wrong?" The camera light blinked on, and suddenly I realized the opportunity before me. This wasn't just about a race anymore. It was about everything Harrison Reed had tried to take from me, everything my father had built, everything I had fought to preserve. I composed myself, thought carefully about my words, and spoke directly into the camera. "It feels incredible, but I didn't do it alone. This victory belongs to everyone who believed in me when others didn't, my incredible pit crew of volunteers, my father's loyal customers, and most of all, my dad, who taught me that with enough determination and hard work, nothing is impossible." I paused, choosing my next words carefully. This race was about more than just competition for me. It was about proving that Sullivan's Garage deserves its place in this community. We might not have the biggest facility or the fanciest equipment, but we have heart, integrity, and generations of experience. So to everyone watching who needs honest automotive service from people who truly care about your vehicles, we're open Monday morning, and we'd love to show you what we can do. Elena grinned, recognizing good copy when she heard it. Any response to those who said a woman couldn't compete at this level? I smiled, making sure the camera caught my expression. "I think today's results speak for themselves. But I'd add that in my experience, cars don't care about the gender of the person fixing or driving them. They respond to skill, knowledge, and respect things that have nothing to do with whether you're a man or a woman." The interview continued briefly, with questions about the race itself and my future plans. Throughout it all, I maintained my composure, even as I spotted Harrison Reed storming away from the track, refusing to speak with any media. The aftermath of the race transformed everything. By Monday morning, Elena's story had run in the local paper with the headline, "Mechanic's Daughter Defies Odds, Podiums in Debut Race." My phone rang constantly, people wanting interviews, customers scheduling appointments, even a few potential sponsors inquiring about future races. The garage, which had been struggling to stay afloat, suddenly had a 2-week waiting list. Harrison Reed was conspicuously silent, avoiding public comment on his team's performance or my unexpected success. But the real confrontation came a week later, when he appeared at Sullivan's Garage unannounced, looking decidedly less polished than usual. I was elbow-deep in an engine rebuild when Joe showed him in, his expression clearly communicating that he'd rather throw Reed out than leave us alone. 5 minutes, I told Joe, who reluctantly withdrew, but left the office door open. Harrison remained standing, surveying the busy workshop with what almost looked like resignation. "Quite the turnaround," he finally said. "You've become quite the local celebrity." I wiped my hands on a shop rag, saying nothing, waiting for him to get to the point. He sighed, uncharacteristically uncomfortable. "I've come to make you another offer." I raised an eyebrow, silently prompting him to continue. "Not for the garage," he clarified quickly. "That ship has clearly sailed. I'm offering you a driver's seat with Reed Performance Racing. The proposition was so unexpected that for a moment I wasn't sure I'd heard correctly. You want me to drive for you? Reed nodded, his expression pained, but determined. The sponsors were, sir, impressed by your performance. More importantly, they were impressed by the public response to it. They feel you have marketing potential that would be valuable to the brand. Translation: his corporate backers had recognized an opportunity and were pressuring him to capitalize on it, regardless of his personal feelings. And the expansion plans for the property next door? I asked pointedly. His jaw tightened. Could be. Reconsidered, as part of the negotiation. I studied him carefully, noting the strain around his eyes, the forced neutrality of his expression. For a brief, heady moment, I savored the reversal Harrison Reed, who had tried to destroy everything I cared about, now asking for my help, the temptation to reject him outright, to savor that petty victory, was strong. But my father had always taught me to think beyond immediate satisfaction to long-term consequences. I need time to consider it, I said finally. This isn't just about me. I have responsibilities here, people who depend on this garage. He nodded stiffly. Take a week. The offer is generous. As he turned to leave, I added, and Harrison, if we find evidence connecting you to the vandalism of my car before the race, no deal in the world will stop me from pressing charges. His step faltered almost imperceptibly before he continued out the door without looking back. That evening, after closing the garage, I drove out to Riverside Speedway once more. The track was quiet, bathed in the golden light of sunset. I parked in the empty lot and walked to the bleachers, sitting where my father used to watch races, trying to sort through my tangled thoughts. Reed's offer was tempting in many ways: financial security, professional opportunities, the chance to pursue racing seriously. But it also meant walking away from Dad's legacy, from the business he'd built with his own hands. As I debated with myself, Walter Thompson appeared, seemingly unsurprised to find me there. Heard about Reed's offer, he said, settling beside me on the bench. News traveled fast in our town. Quite the choice you're facing. We sat in companionable silence for a while before he spoke again. Your father was faced with a similar decision once. You know, after his big win at the regionals back in the day, he had offers from several teams. Could have gone professional. Maybe even made it to the national circuit. This was news to me. Dad had never mentioned it. Why didn't he? Walter smiled, his weathered face creasing with the memory. Your mother had just told him she was pregnant. He looked at the racing contracts, looked at the little garage he'd just opened, and made his choice. Said some victories aren't about trophies. He stood, patting my shoulder. No right answer here, Emma. Just your answer. As he walked away, I remained on the bleachers until stars appeared overhead, thinking about choices, consequences, and what victory really meant. My decision came with the dawn. I called Harrison Reed's office first thing Monday morning and arranged a meeting for that afternoon. When he arrived at the garage, I was ready. A counter-proposal prepared and printed. I won't drive for Reed Performance, I told him without preamble. I'm a Sullivan, and Sullivans race for themselves. His face hardened, but I continued before he could speak. However, I am willing to discuss a partnership. Sullivan's Garage specializes in custom performance work. Reed Performance has marketing reach and corporate connections. There's room for both of us in this town, if we're smart about it. I slid the document across the desk. My terms, including your withdrawal of the expansion plans next door, and instead a joint venture to turn that property into a community racing school, one that welcomes everyone with talent, regardless of gender or background. Harrison looked genuinely surprised, then suspicious. Why would I agree to any of this? There are other female drivers I could recruit if that's what the sponsors want. I smiled. Because I'm not just any female driver. I'm the mechanic's daughter who beat your professional team with a street car and a volunteer crew. And because this solution gives us both what we really want, you save face with your sponsors, and I keep my father's legacy alive while growing it into something even he couldn't have imagined. For a long moment, he studied the proposal, his expression unreadable. Then, with a hint of reluctant respect, he extended his hand. You drive a hard bargain, Sullivan. Your father would be proud. 6 months later, the Sullivan Reed Racing Academy opened its doors on the property adjacent to my garage. Our first class included 10 students, 4 of them young women who had seen my race and dared to dream bigger because of it. The garage continued to thrive, with a reputation for excellence that attracted customers from 3 counties away. I raced when I could, proudly wearing the Sullivan name on my jumpsuit, though now with better equipment and occasionally even a professional pit crew. Harrison Reed and I maintained a wary professional relationship that, over time, evolved into something approaching mutual respect. He never admitted to the sabotage attempt, and I never found concrete proof, but we both understood the unspoken truth between us. More importantly, we both recognized that our conflict had ultimately created something valuable neither of us could have built alone. On the anniversary of my father's death, I visited his grave with fresh flowers and the trophy from my first race. You were right, Dad, I said to the quiet stone. Some victories aren't about trophies. They're about staying true to yourself, even when the whole world tells you that you can't or shouldn't. As I placed the flowers beside his headstone, I noticed a small gift box that hadn't been there before. Inside was a battered stopwatch, my father's lucky charm during his racing days, with a note in Joe's handwriting. He wanted you to have this when you were ready. He always knew you would be. I clutched the stopwatch to my chest, tears flowing freely, finally understanding that the greatest race wasn't on any track. It was the daily decision to honor those who believed in us by refusing to give up, no matter how many times the world tried to knock us down. In that race, I would always keep driving, 1 lap at a time, just as he taught me.